There's, and it was offered to us to provide an update on Yazzie Martinez, and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Moore from New Mexico Highlands to introduce both President Wolf and our distinguished presenters. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it on? Yes. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you so much for attending today's APS Tribal Leadership Summit. This is really an important partnership with New Mexico Highlands University and Albuquerque Public Schools. We did a session earlier this morning on the Indigenous Knowledge Roadmap, which is a part of the partnership we have with Phil and his unit. And at this point, we had decided to go ahead and introduce our new president at Highlands University, Dr. Neil Wolf, and then he'll say a few words. Following that, we have one of the original attorneys working on the Yazzie Martinez case, and Ms. Loretta Trujillo, who represents Transform Education New Mexico. And both of them have been able to share with the community at large some of the updates, where we are at with this case, and why it's so important that we continue to keep this on the table. And at this point, Dr. Wolf.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. And it's great to be here. Thank you for allowing us to be here. And thank you, Dr. Moore, exiting stage right. Thank you for the introduction. I have the pleasure of serving as the president of Highlands since July of this year. And it's been a whirlwind couple months, but one of the things I've learned very quickly is to do whatever Dr. Moore tells me to. One of the things that we would like to share as we do an intro is a few things from Highlands, and then get into what you're probably more interested in learning about is the update on the Yazzie Martinez case. As I was exploring institutions that I wanted to serve, the Yazzie Martinez ruling was a factor in showing how the state of New Mexico is trying to do better, trying to invest, and your advocacy for what that means is really important to me. And to join an effort throughout the state was important. So I appreciate the work that has been going on and the work to continue. We at Highlands have a strong commitment to recruitment, retaining, but most importantly, graduating our students. We support them the best we can. We've actually, through Yazzie and other opportunities, we just signed a partnership with Complete College America. It's a Gates family funded project to help students graduate. It's $100 million investment that they're making with only about 80 institutions. So we're going to get better at helping our students enter, succeed, graduate, and then thrive. I'm honored as president, but honored that Highlands have a number of initiatives underway. And I'm honored to support the Indigenous Knowledge Roadmap that some of you heard earlier about. We also have a Center for Education and Study of Diverse Populations, as well as our School of Education's Institute for Culturally and Linguistically Responsive Learning and Teaching. We have a number of MOUs with tribal nations. Some of those need to be updated. And one of my great privileges is trying to update those. Last week, we were on the Navajo Nation, and we visited the Upper Fruitland Chapter House. And there, we were able to talk about how we might learn and serve potential students better by matching scholarships, by holding recruitment events. And one of the things that was probably one of the most touching experiences that I've ever had, when I got to, a little backstory, I came from Oregon, and one of the things that we did at my last school was we posted and flew all the flags of our tribal nations in the state, and had a great flag raising ceremony, and was able to honor the tribal nations in that way. I want to do the same thing at Highlands. So we've got a number of flagpoles out in our Centennial Park that fly the flags of where our students are from, all the international countries that they're from. But what we're missing is our tribal nations. So I said, well, let's include our tribal nations. So I shared this with a couple of the elders at the chapter house, and Elvis Keys is his name. He said, "Oh, I got a flag for you." And so he hopped up and went and grabbed a flag from Navajo Nation, and they presented it to us, and it was one of the most touching experiences that I've had, just to be able to do that. So I know how important it is to see yourself represented there at the university, and flags of our tribal nations, our pueblos, and land grants are an opportunity to do that. So if there is an interest amongst any of this group, please let us know, and we're happy to honor you in that way. We will go and visit all tribes and pueblos. We have a number of programs, but my keen interest is to get to know you and let you know that we are here to serve. I think one of the things that's important to know that institutions of higher education need to do more than just simple land acknowledgement statements, which are great, but we can't be satisfied with things like that. We need to be focused on student outcomes. And so I appreciate the work that's going on here and the update on the Yazzie Martinez, so we can actually move the needle. Instead of talking about it, we can actually do things about it. So I'm happy to support a lot of these efforts, happy to learn about what we can support in the future. And with that, I'll turn it over to Elisa for an update on the Yazzie Martinez.
John, can you turn on the screen, please? Yes. Is that John?
Is that whatever is your projected
Oh,
device?
I put in the USB.
Okay.
I could put it into my.
Oh, so
Is that John? Hi, John. Can you pull it up from my USB port, or you want it from my laptop? Sorry? Okay. We can do that. Thank you.
John should go. There we go.
Okay, there we go. Thanks so much. Thanks for your patience, everybody. So my name is Elisa Deal, and I'm actually going to switch this out really quick. And I'm an attorney with the Center on Law and Poverty, and also a member of the legal team representing the Yazzie plaintiffs in the Yazzie Martinez case. Thank you so much to Dr. Moore and others for having us here today. We really always feel honored when we have the opportunity to talk with people like you all and see it as a huge part of our job. Let me also acknowledge a few things that I'm going to do a little bit of the background of this case. I realize it will probably be information that might be well known. In fact, perhaps it's even the result of work done by people in this very room. I see some familiar faces, and in fact, we have Marcia Lino here. I hate to put you on the spot, Marcia, but she is one of the family plaintiffs in the Yazzie group of plaintiffs. And so I guess with that, I'll just get started, but thank you again for having us. So kind of briefly before we get into that background, I kind of want to set a scene for how we try to make systemic change at the Center on Law and Poverty. So lawyers are taught that the law itself produces justice, and we're taught to think that social change flows from the law, like winning a lawsuit or changing policy. But really, history teaches us that movements of people with the lived experiences have always been the engine of actual social change. And so while I strongly believe that the Yazzie Martinez case is an extremely powerful tool, it is but one of many in creating an equitable education in New Mexico. So very briefly about the Center on Law and Poverty. So we try to do what is called community lawyering, where we don't just march into communities and say, let us file a lawsuit to fix the issues. We work through authentic and ongoing, meaningful relationship so that the solutions that we are advancing are those that have been identified by the people impacted by the problems. So we do that through community outreach, engagement, education. We do it through litigation and through legislative advocacy. All right, so the Yazzie case is really rooted in these two basic strengths of New Mexicans. First, of course, our children, right? Why we're all here today. New Mexico students are culturally and linguistically gifted and have just as much ability to learn and achieve at high levels as children anywhere. And then the second, of course, is our educational expertise and knowledge that lies within our state, or even within this room, in fact. And we know what's needed for our children to succeed, and we have experts right here to do it. But of course, we know that our education system is in crisis, right? We know that there's been a lack of resources, funding isn't directed to the students who need it most. We know that the state has failed to provide a multicultural framework or the programs and services that students need to succeed. And while students' diverse cultures, languages, and heritages really should be honored and embraced, these assets are routinely ignored within the education system. And of course, one that has systemically and historically discriminated against children of color. And because of these failures by the state, not only do the inequities remain within our system, the insufficiencies, but as we all know, the statistics that New Mexico ranks the lowest in the country for many of the metrics used to measure student outcomes. But of course, those outcomes fail to actually acknowledge and measure all of the assets that our kids actually bring to the class. So the New Mexico State Constitution requires the state to provide a uniform and sufficient public education. And this is the quote verbatim. But New Mexico also has some of the strongest laws in the country in educating our diverse student body. Laws we should be really proud of, right? So I've listed 5 here, plus federal laws. And these are really rooted in the idea of equity, and that the key to student success is a multicultural education and a high-quality, diverse teacher workforce. These laws also help to define what a sufficient education is for certain student groups in New Mexico. And by doing that, they really create additional rights for those students when they walk into a public school classroom. I'm going to just kind of briefly touch on each. So the first is the Public School Code, where the legislature has adopted a specific standard of education that's grounded in multicultural and multilingual framework to meet the needs of New Mexico's diverse student body. And of course, also a high quality and diverse teacher workforce, as I mentioned. Oops, there we go. So the next of these is the Hispanic Education Act, which really addresses standards for educating Hispanic students in public schools. And the purpose is to provide for the study, development, and implementation of educational systems that will improve academic success for these students and close the achievement gaps. The purpose is also to encourage family parental engagement in the education of Hispanic children, and then also to provide a mechanism for collaboration between stakeholders. So community organizations, schools, districts, educators, policymakers, the PED, of course, institutes of higher education, to really develop and implement these remedies to improve outcomes. Similarly, the New Mexico Indian Education Act has requirements for what constitutes a multicultural education for Native American students. And again, one of the stated purposes is to ensure there's very authentic and deep collaboration between stakeholders. So tribal education departments, community-based organizations, PED, universities, and policymakers to work together to find ways to improve educational opportunities for Native American students. One example of the way that this is to be accomplished that's outlined in this law is for the PED to develop and implement culturally and linguistically responsive support services for the purposes of increasing the number of Native American teachers, administrators, principals, et cetera. And then ongoing professional development for all educators who are serving Native students. And then finally, the Bilingual Multicultural Act, which was the first of its kind in the country and is over 50 years old now. Something I think New Mexicans should be really proud of. So the stated goal of this law is for students, English language learner students, to become biliterate in English and a second language and to meet state academic content standards. And so the state then has a duty to ensure all English language learner students have an adequate language acquisition program and that they continue to receive content area education in their native language if necessary. This law also recognizes, again, a need for teachers to have training on the education of ELL students. So as I mentioned earlier, these state laws really confer additional rights on students when they enter a public school classroom, and then additional obligations on the state to uphold those rights. So this is a recap of what the court was looking at, starting from the constitutional obligation for sufficient education, and then the court looked at these various measures for what sufficiency means. But really it looked directly at the laws we have on the books, and that comes down to, at its core, equity. The court looked at student outcomes, right, graduation rates, proficiency rates, et cetera, and ultimately found that the state was in violation of our own laws that define what a sufficient and equitable education is. The court also recognized from the outset that relief in the case is going to involve state and local agencies beyond PED. So it assumed that there would need to be involvement from districts, from educators, from institutes of higher education, from early childhood education, and really a collaborative effort to meet the mandate of the Constitution. So it's with this background that the Yazzie Martinez case started. Both cases started separately, filed in state court in 2014. The Yazzie plaintiffs include 5 families, including Ms. Lino, and 6 school districts. The Martinez plaintiffs include 12 families. The defendants are the executive, so the governor, the public education department, the secretary of public education, and the legislature. And so the case was consolidated in 2015, and since then has moved on as one lawsuit. A 2-month trial was had in 2017, where the court heard from hundreds of witnesses and received thousands of pieces of evidence. And then a year later, decided in favor of the plaintiffs and said that the state of New Mexico is violating our own Constitution by failing to provide a sufficient education. The court said that a sufficient education is one that gives every student the opportunity to be ready for college or career. However, at the heart of this case are 4 student groups who have experienced the deepest inequities. So that's English language learner students, Native American students, students with disabilities, and students from low-income households. The court used the term to describe those 4 student groups together as at risk, which I try to avoid. Or another way of framing it is that they're at risk of being failed by the state, right? So as I said, the court looked to what sufficiency meant, and by not implementing and fully funding the state laws that I mentioned earlier is an additional constitutional violation from the state. So about 3 or 4 months after the initial decision, the court issued a 600-page document called Findings of Fact and Conclusions of Law. And so I always joke that that document could be the subject of probably a year of coursework, but we've narrowed it down to one simple slide. But really what we did was we took those findings and grouped them into these main bucket areas. And so it's really to kind of visualize that the judge's decision is completely comprehensive. He calls for a total overhaul of the education system and really addressed all of the areas of the system where the state has failed to do what it needs to do to meet the needs of the students at the heart of this case. It emphasizes the cultural and linguistic and academic needs of students in the 4 student groups. And then I'll just briefly kind of summarize each of these areas on the screen. So first, the court said that PED has not given school districts a framework to use to provide a multicultural education. And again, that we have not implemented our own state laws that we have on the books. The court said that programs and services like full-day pre-kindergarten, extended learning time, culturally and linguistically relevant curriculum, instructional materials, and assessments are effective, but not available to all students in the 4 student groups. The court really went into great detail about the teacher workforce, both that having a high quality and diverse teacher workforce is critical, that effective teachers are one of the most important components of a student's education and can have a positive effect on closing an achievement gap. And it also acknowledged that while there is no doubt that there are many teachers in New Mexico who daily make commendable, even heroic efforts to educate our children, but it came down to the fact that the court determined that the quality of teaching for students in the 4 student groups is inadequate and not meeting the needs of these students. And this is really due to the state's failure to provide sufficient and sustained funding and overall support for educators in the areas of teacher pay, teacher preparation, training, and other in-service supports. The court really outlined the shortages of teachers overall, but then in specific areas, the very low number of Native American teachers, bilingual and TESOL endorsed educators, and special education teachers. And then finally, non-instructional staff as well, so instructional support providers, school counselors, et cetera. And the court finally acknowledged that teachers who are prepared to become a teacher in New Mexico are more effective at teaching New Mexico students. And to me, this is really where higher ed is called in, because while the court doesn't address it specifically, but if we know teachers are most effective when they're prepared here, well, then that means that higher ed has a role in implementing the court's ruling. I would argue that that means that there should be sufficient and sustained funding to programs that exist to train these educators that we have a shortage of. However, that's not always been viewed or how funding has been prioritized. The court said that overall funding is insufficient and not targeted to students in the 4 student groups. And importantly, that lack of funding is not an excuse to violate the constitutional right of our children. And then finally, the court said that the state has a duty to make sure funding is spent on programs and services that actually improve outcomes for students in the 4 student groups, but that the state has failed to do so. Okay, so that gets us to 2018. And here's a kind of a summary timeline of what's gone on since then. So in its 2018 ruling, the court said that the state had until April 15th of 2019, essentially to fix the system, which is a pretty quick turnaround, but meant that the state had to ensure that schools have the resources necessary to give students at the heart of the case the chance to be ready for college or career. Unfortunately, after more than a year of insufficient responses from the state, the Yazzie plaintiffs filed a request for the court asking that the state be required to do more. We wanted the state to come up with a plan of how it was going to implement the court's massive order to truly transform education. And it really still is our view that that is the only way we are going to achieve the mandate called for under the Constitution and really outlined in the court's findings of fact. But the court wanted more information first, and the Martinez plaintiffs had filed a request for a legal process called discovery, where it's information gathering. Lawyers are allowed to ask questions, ask for documents, and do interviews under oath with people within the public education department. And the court wanted that information before it was willing to order a plan and said we could come back at a later time and ask for that plan, but really wanted to see evidence of what the state has and hasn't done. In the meantime, the state also filed to dismiss the case and said it had done enough and should be trusted to do the rest. Luckily, the court said no, that the state wasn't just required to take immediate steps, but really has an obligation to implement long-term comprehensive reforms that substantially improve outcomes for students in the forced student groups. So in the only other piece of this I'll touch on is that the PD actually issued an action plan in 2022. Some of you may be familiar with that document. And while unfortunately it was not what we were looking for, it did not contain the elements that we really see as necessary for a plan to be effective. But they did open it up to public feedback and receive substantial comments and promised to release a second draft in September of 2022. And unfortunately, we've seen nothing since then. However, the important update I'm excited to share today is about a recent motion that the Yazzie and Martinez plaintiffs filed together just last month on September 4th. Oop, that was the wrong way. There we go. So on September 4th, the Yazzie and Martinez plaintiffs together filed a 115-page non-compliance motion and request for remedial action plan. So the motion outlines all the areas where the state has failed to comply with the court's order, again, kind of organized by these issue areas or bucket areas. And so we laid out evidence about student outcomes. We laid out evidence about the deficiencies within the department, like the lack of a plan, high turnover and vacancies, and failure to do what they need to do to hold districts accountable. And then we also provided evidence of the state's failure to meet the needs of each of the 4 student groups. So first by addressing the ongoing lack of compliance with the state laws that I talked about, and identified how the state's actions are really insufficient in a variety of areas. So early childhood education, extended learning, reading and literacy, reducing class sizes, and then other health and wellness, so counselors and instructional support providers that students need to succeed in school. And then we dedicated significant time really talking about the ways in which the state has failed to address the systemic issues that undermine the effectiveness of the teacher workforce. So this includes the persistent number of vacancies and shortages, insufficient pay, insufficient targeted recruitment, generally speaking, and then specifically as to bilingual TESOL-endorsed teachers, creating a pipeline for Native American teachers and special ed teachers. We also addressed the state's failure to increase the diversity of the workforce, and then finally, insufficient funding and support for teachers in education prep programs, professional development, mentorship, and other supports. So what we asked was that the court order the development of a 5-year remedial action plan. We asked that this process be led by the LESC staff, so the Legislative Education Study Committee, which is staffed by year-round experts in education. They're not elected officials. And they really have, as I said, deep expertise, deep knowledge, access to data, and a vision for what a transformed system in New Mexico would look like. And we did this because we know that this has to be a deeply collaborative process, that if any plan is created in a silo, that all the other stakeholders who will be responsible for implementing it or ensuring that it's done correctly, it's hard to have buy-in for something like that. And so we really envision a coordinated effort, right, among education leaders, state and tribal government officials, education experts and advocates, and other community and family partners in the state's education system, and then along with the PED, of course, and other state agencies. We also developed 9 components that I've kind of summarized here because they're too long to fit on a slide. But these are I guess the best way to describe them would be 9 goals of what a transform education system would look like. So they are written from not a deficit perspective, but of a transform perspective. They are aligned with the bucket areas in the findings of fact. And importantly, they're also aligned with the remedies asked for by several stakeholder groups, such as Transform Education New Mexico, which Loretta will talk a little bit more about. They're also aligned with the solutions identified in the Tribal Remedy Framework, which is really a blueprint for what the state needs to do to meet the needs of Native American students, of course, which has been endorsed by all 23 nations, tribes, and pueblos in New Mexico. It's aligned with the PED's strategic plan in many ways. And then finally, it's aligned with the conversations that the legal team, the education team at the Center on Law and Poverty, the conversations that we have with stakeholders and community groups, and hearing what they're seeing happen to their student or in their classroom, and the ongoing needs and what they're asking for to meet those needs. So it's really a reflection of the work that has always been done, that's been ongoing. And again, those solutions that are created by those experiencing the problems. So we asked that the court require that these 9 components be included in the plan as necessary to implement the court's order, and to address all the other deficiencies, all the other failures of the state that we outline in our motion. So I did just pull out one on the educator workforce, and I don't know that I need to read it. I'm happy to share these slides with anyone who's interested, and you can actually also access the full motion on our website. And I'm happy to direct people there for anyone who is interested. But as you can see there, we really tried to work from an asset-based lens of what this vision would be. And as I said, this is just an example that pertains to educators, but there's one on a multicultural, multilingual framework. There's one around students with disabilities, curriculum and instruction, family supports, technology, funding, et cetera. What am I doing? Sorry, wrong button, okay. So finally then we asked for each of these components that the plan include some really specific aspects. So actions that the state has to implement, the actor or agency responsible for overseeing that implementation, an analysis of additional funding that's needed, and then objective measures of how the state is going to see whether progress is being made. We asked that the plan include each of these for each year, 2025 through 2030. And then finally, we asked that the state have to report back to the court on a quarterly basis on how implementation is coming so that there is accountability and we're not waiting years between we're not waiting years for the court to get involved when the state is failing to do its job. We hope that that is an ongoing pressure so that there really is movement forward. All right, so before I pass it on to Loretta, this is just kind of a summary of what we continue to work on. So the director of the education team, Melissa Candelaria, and I will continue to talk with communities and stakeholders, which is our favorite part of our job, quite truthfully. We're kind of planning out some more of community information sessions. In court, along with the legal team for the Martinez plaintiffs, we are waiting for the state to file their response to our motion, which is due October 21st. Then the plaintiffs have one other chance to give written information to the court in a reply. So the state gets to defend itself, I suppose, which is a little hard to imagine how they do that, but they will. Bye, guys. Thanks for coming. And then we get to respond to what they say. And then we anticipate that the court will schedule a hearing where we'll go in front of the judge and make arguments as to why we should win. It's possible that that would probably not happen until early 2025 or perhaps even the spring. And then finally, the education team, the legal team works closely with various coalitions to advocate for policy change and funding measures during the legislative session. And so that partnership has been ongoing as we look to the 2025 legislative session. And I think with that, I will turn it over to Loretta. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for including me in the invitation to speak with you this afternoon. I want to just start off a little bit with some context as to who I am and how I came to be in this position. I was born and raised in Santa Fe, not too far from here, and I dedicated 20 plus years to the field of education. I was a classroom teacher. In that time, I taught middle school, high school. I was an AVID teacher. Anyone familiar with AVID? So I worked with a number of students who were the first in their family to go to college. I also ended that portion of my time professionally by working in the Indian Education Department in Santa Fe Public Schools, where I served up to 400 students right from the onset of COVID until 2022. I offer that information because I've been in meetings like this. I personally organized tribal consultations. I dedicated time to getting to know students and understanding their experiences, how they ended up in public school in Santa Fe, and how they were disconnected from their homelands very often, how classrooms and teachers were frankly dehumanizing spaces for Native students in traditional public schools. In 2022, I was honored to be selected to be the executive director, and I'm entering into my third year. And I offer all of that and then a little bit more detail in terms of being born and raised in the city of Santa Fe, but having ancestral ties to the Chama Valley, the lands of the Jicarilla and the Southern Ute. And I say that with deep pride because my story is like many Native students whose ancestors were punished for speaking a language other than English. So I don't present here in front of you as a bilingual student or a bilingual fluent Spanish speaker, as I wish I could say that. But more importantly, I want to shine a light on Transform Education's mission. We use the name Transform with intention. We're not interested in small legislative reforms on a year-by-year basis. We're really asking for drastic systems change. And the way that this has kind of come to my awareness is that in the time I've served in this role, and I've had 2 legislative sessions under my belt, it's been my observation that a lot of our efforts directed at solving the education crisis in our state are piecemeal. Individual pieces of legislation presented one legislator, one committee meeting at a time. And to us, that seems to be problematic in that every arrow is pointing in a different direction. And so what this motion is intended to do is to align our vision towards equity. And with that commitment to equity, what we're asking for is distribution of resources in a way that has not been done before. In fact, equity calls us to give the most to people that have the least. And so we anticipate that there's going to be a deep need for folks like yourself to raise awareness, to take what you've learned from this presentation and have that conversation in other spaces, whether they're professional, but even more importantly, at the dinner table with our own community. Countless times I've been in a position and asked, what do I do now that I'm not in the classroom? And I ask, have you heard of this historic lawsuit? And unfortunately, even 6 years later, the average person has not heard of this lawsuit. So we're here to stand as in service to you. If communities need presentations or resources, I'm interested in helping you meet that need, but more importantly, raising awareness among our young people. And so I'm happy to share that our efforts in the last year as a coalition have been directed at talking with youth. So I was super excited to see those young students in our space today. Essentially, young people are the most impacted and least consulted group of all. And certainly I would put teachers very close in proximity to them. Our efforts have centered around a campaign called Freedom Dreaming 2037. And that campaign kind of is inspired by the work of scholars who have named a need to define what we want to build. And that's what this plan is intending to do in a very concrete way. So all of the effort that has gone into this motion has been culled from numerous conversations, both with members of our coalition who are on the ground. At various times, we've met with maybe some of you or been in spaces and listened. And I'm just here to offer that this is something that is a reflection. What we're asking for is a reflection of what you all have asked for. And so it's incumbent upon us to not lose hope. I invite us not to think that this is in the hands of the governor, of the legislative body, of a superintendent, of your school board members. It's incumbent upon us as a community to understand that this is about taking collective action for our children. In our work in the Freedom Dreaming gatherings that were held in all parts of the state, young people have told us that the house is on fire, and their biggest concern is that adults are not ready to advocate for them. And I'm in fact confident that all of us here are ready to do just that. I'm happy to announce that a report will be coming out in early January to impart some of the recommendations that come directly from youth. And I'm also eager to screen a documentary with you all that's going to complement those discussions and how young people have named their desire for change and transformation. They have such deep courage, and I'm here to represent that and carry that voice forward into the legislature and into spaces like this. And so it's just an honor to serve in this role. And I believe we have time for questions, but I want to end with this note. We're all here for the same reason. We want to take care of our children. All children are sacred, and that's what this motion is designed to address. So we invite you to work more deeply and more closely with us in the next few months and even during the session. There's an interesting point of fact. A lawmaker that served as the longest-standing chair of the Education Committee told me in a conversation over coffee that it can take as little as 10 communications from constituents to move a lawmaker in a certain direction for or against any particular thing that they're about to hear. And I invite you to take this issue, this motion, this call for a comprehensive plan, take it to your representatives, take it to your senators, take it to your board members, take it to your superintendents, take it to whoever we can, because I'm not confident that this is going to happen just by the sheer power of the courts. It's going to have to take collective action. And so with that, I just want to say that I'm honored and thrilled to be part of a collective action that includes you all. I think we wanted to stand for questions. So at this time, are there questions in the audience?
Thank you for the presentation. And I was going to ask if we could get a copy of the PowerPoint, at least to the tribes, so that they're aware of what you folks are working on. And my question centers around the funding. Granted, the case was ruled on, and New Mexico is being held accountable. The challenge for them is finding the dollars to implement what not only Native students are in need of, but all students. My question is focusing on the federal dollars that we already receive. You have impact aid, and right now those dollars have an opportunity to have an impact on the students already. Where we're located, we deal with Grant Cebolla County schools, and we've been having an issue in regards to understanding how those dollars are being spent and where they're being spent. I'm pretty sure it's like that in the other school districts. So that's the challenge. We're already getting federal dollars to help students get to the level of getting to college, and then New Mexico will then kick in with funds to help educate those students to become the teachers we need in the classrooms. But if the public school systems are not sharing that information that allows the tribes to help follow the students to help to then truly understand the metric that we're getting to, then we're already behind the 8 ball. So at what point, besides this lawsuit, do the tribes need to stand up again and ask the state to then revisit the impact aid funding that comes from the feds? How does that interact? The other question I have is looking at the websites, and just being up in Santa Fe, there was an idea of $50 million being invested so they can recoup dollars to help fund the process. That didn't go through. We're hoping next year, the following year. At the same time, the state provided some information in regards to, yes, they have a windfall of cash now, but as they're moving forward, they also showed a chart where the funds start coming down. So they're already going to be looking for dollars to not only run their government, but to kick towards this project. So how then do we keep this project moving forward with the funds that are needed, knowing that the state coffers are going to start coming down? That's the challenge in itself, is finding the dollars to truly implement what we want. And the dollars are coming from all over, but just looking at what the state provided during the state legislature, in the slide they showed with the dollars coming down, my question is, how are they going to help fund this lawsuit? That's the challenge. For me personally, that's the challenge, is how do we then continue the effort knowing we're going to have less cash in our pocket to help fund the project? So thank you.
Thank you so much for your questions and the comments that you included. So a couple of answers. So first, as I said, the court said that lack of funding is simply not an excuse. And the court said, I'm going to defer to the legislature to figure out funding and where it comes from, but gave examples of ways in which the state could raise revenue if it had to. I think there was 10 listed, right? Just to say, funding is not an excuse, lack of funding. It just isn't. This is a constitutional right of our children. And so the state needs to figure that out. Now, I realize I said that once to a former lawmaker, and she kind of rolled her eyes at me, because perhaps that seems like a loftier goal than is reality. But the fact remains is that the court has retained jurisdiction of this case to enforce its orders, and will continue to do that until we have met the goals of true transformation. So that's one piece. The second is, I think it also speaks to the need for there to be a plan, right? How much money do we need year to year for all of these very specific areas? And, the 9 components are really the general starting point. We see that being broken down into very specific action steps with a dollar amount attached year to year. And so the legislature knows what is expected of it. And the court can't tell the legislature what to do in that way, but our hope is that through a collaborative planning process, that would help make sure that legislators are really a part of things and knowing, all right, we go into session and here's what needs to go towards, a teacher pipeline and all these initiatives, et cetera. The other piece of that is, I think, I'm not going to speak about a specific school board, but certainly school boards and the issues that we definitely hear about, right? And, my view would be that based on the components and based on conversations and other framework documents, that there needs to be efforts there, and that there also needs to be a prioritization of community-based programming. So funding for tribes to be able to offer the programs that they feel are best for their kids within their communities, and really see that as a perfect complement to what's offered in schools. Hopefully it's a complement. Hopefully it's not just making up for it, right? But really seeing that as a complement, that those things need to go hand in hand. And so funding does need to, again, be prioritized. For those initiatives, it needs to be sustained and sufficient, and determining how much is needed for those things every year. Let me see, I'm just looking at my notes. So impact aid is... that's a harder question to answer. And let's perhaps chat offline, and I could get some contact information for you to have kind of additional discussions. And I may connect you with my colleague Melissa on that issue. But I believe that there is work to be done in terms of ensuring that, like all other funding that goes through the SEG to schools, that it's actually spent on the kids who are entitled to it, who generate the funds, who we have a moral obligation to be spending it on, right, in my opinion. So that's kind of the short and sweet of that. I hope that was at least helpful and answered your questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the presentation. I echo what the councilman from Laguna is talking about, the PowerPoint. But I want to ask a very central question, and that is that we have a lot of activity and a lot of actions going on. Besides the New Mexico Poverty Law, the tribal framework, and the other, the NM10, is there a central coordinating body that actually looks at all the implementation issues? Are there all school districts that actually have a sort of a plan moving forward? That's the sense I'm getting. I've worked with a lot of the tribal councils before. I worked with Laguna for a long time, and now working with Zuni. And I don't see a central coordinating body that actually gauges them. And here's the problem. A lot of times school districts are told you have to do this. They're general goals, but there really is no gauging that. Is there a way to look at a lot of the eclectic groups that you see here? Is there a way we can form a coordinating body that says of all the school districts, which school districts are actually making improvements? One of the other things that you have a lot of discussion from the state legislature 2-3 years ago about equity councils. That's sort of a spinoff, but that's more on the public education division side. And there are a lot of school districts that actually aren't on the same wavelength. For instance, the Zuni Public School District is a separate entity alone, a school district. The boundaries of the reservation is the school district. But yet we have over half of the administrators non-tribal members. We have a lot of teachers that used to be within the classrooms. When a new non-tribal administrations came in, they moved a lot of those folks out. For me, that's going backwards. And the tribal council has tried to make inroads with them and trying to meet with them and say, where are you guys in the framework? That's precisely what is detailed over here, is to see how APSs look forward. It's ironic that you have a large urban area that actually has a lot of diverse students, and they're making more progress where you have a very specific 90% Zuni population, we're not moving forward. It also begs the question, because we are now looking at the school district's emphasis on trying to get housing for the teachers. And they're looking at a housing division for the schools, for the school population, costing about $84 million. And the question I have for them is that, how many of those are earmarked for Zuni tribal members to also teach in the schools? So for me, that's one of those things I want to just use you as a critical issue, because there doesn't seem to be any coordination engaging that. And I agree with Mr. Gacko saying about, for me, it's always follow the money. Can we actually have another gauge that says these are the school districts, they receive X amount of numbers that are tied to the Yazzie versus Martinez case, and how much of those are actually being spent for teaching educators? Exactly what you pointed out in your original plan, where does the state of New Mexico actually educate those teachers? So that's one of the critical venues and probably targets we need to look at. The flip side of that is, how does the impact aid, it took us over 20 years to get to the point where we're at, where the state finally releases all 100% of the impact aid to the school districts. And for Zuni, I'm seeing 84% of that money being targeted for teachers. So is there any other ways that we can look at that? I know you can need to look at it from that perspective. I've also heard Regis Pecos and his crew talk about the tribal remedy framework, but there doesn't seem to be a very solid gauging of all the school districts that have to abide by these issues. I'm sure our Hispanic counterparts are asking the same questions. So that goes back to the original question. Is there a need or an effort to look at the money and really decide what are those critical factors? Teachers, are they being taught really core strategic strategies to address the ELL issue? For the multicultural education, the English as second learners, which a lot of my students are at, are there any measures to do that? So I know that's a very comprehensive question, but those are really critical. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Excellent questions. I really appreciate, and I think actually your questions are just such a good example of how all of this is so intertwined, and that the state's efforts, which have been to kind of throw money at a few initiatives, are just never going to, collectively address the things that have already been brought up in here. And so there has to be this really coordinated planning process. So I guess that's what I would speak to as what we envision happening, that there is a planning process, and that, I kind of envision it that stakeholders, districts, tribal communities, et cetera, could come into a planning process and plug in easily and say, okay, here's what we've identified we need, right? With dollar amounts. And that is then taken collectively into a statewide plan with an understanding of what those needs are as identified by, communities and stakeholder groups. And they're going to be big numbers, and they should be big numbers, because what's being asked of the state is a massive overhaul. But that's why we need to plot it out and know how much money is needed. It's why money needs to be going into pipeline initiatives to create, to train additional teachers from the communities in which we want them to go back and teach, and what initiatives need to be in place to encourage and support them to do that. My vision is that would all be a piece of what happens in a planning process, because simply, raising salaries isn't going to do all that's needed to really create the workforce that our students have a right to. So in terms of kind of looking at this from this is an obligation of PED. And we learned during depositions that they just simply do not have the capacity and the infrastructure to be essentially doing site visits and to support schools. And that's whether it's looking at their bilingual multicultural education program, whether they're looking at the issues that you discussed, or providing other supports based on the needs of that school, of that district. And really, they have a statutory obligation to do that in some areas, and they just simply don't. And so that is, again, why a piece of the plan is looking at the department itself. We want it to be staffed with, people who are highly trained, highly qualified, again, who come from those same communities that they're working with, all of the same things, and that there are enough people to really help support the implementation of this plan with really one-on-one connection. So your question about a coordinating body, that does not exist. That could be a role of PED. It should be a role of PED, and we envision it being the role of PED to implement a plan, which we will hopefully win. So I guess the last piece I wanted to offer, and then I'll turn it over to Loretta to add her thoughts. But going back to an idea, and we've spoken with some districts, we've spoken with some other stakeholder groups since we filed this motion, and I would really hope that this would be, the takeaway here would be, here's a tool of leverage. Hopefully we're successful in our motion. Hopefully this is a chance to go and actually outline the needs of our school, of our district, our classroom, whatever it is, and use this as leverage to actually get that funding and get the technical support or whatever else is needed to actually make that happen, and to be able to kind of hit the ground running if in fact we're successful and the judge agrees to order what we've asked for. We really see it as a super expansive process, because that's the only way it's actually going to be effective. And if those steps haven't been taken, or haven't been taken with the level of detail that might be useful in a planning process, then I would offer that there is thought given to whether that's that work is possible and could happen as we await our time before a judge.
I wanted to also follow up on this notion of accountability. I think that both of you are raising that issue. And what I wanted to offer is that there are some specifics in the motion that lay out a timeline for this effort to be undertaken. And built into that timeline is a requirement for status reports. And I was pleasantly surprised to see that, because I think it will be a significant tool for ensuring that whoever the actors or agencies are that are using these funds will actually have to report back the ways that they're targeting those investments to the student groups named in the lawsuit. There's a lot of disagreement about this injection of investments that certain policymakers will tout as being aligned with this lawsuit. We've never asked for those particular kinds of investments. Instead, when we look at the data that they have about whether or not those efforts are yielding any changes for the student groups named in the lawsuit, they either don't have the data or the answer is no. And so this fight is actually about ensuring that this work happens and it affects the students named in the lawsuit. I also want to say that along with accountability and to follow up on what Elisa was just saying, there's a lot you guys can do now while we're in this waiting period. It would be nice to be able to report back and say at a certain point that community advocates like perhaps TENM or Tribal Education Alliance will be included in the planning process. And if that's the case, then I would want to come back to you and say, what are the things that I need to advocate for? The more specifics and descriptions and details that you all have prepared, the easier it is for us to engage in and ask for very specific things in this planning process. But as a teacher, I find it ironic that on a daily basis, I had to have a lesson plan. Every district has to have an ESSA plan. You all probably have to have plans. And how ironic is it that our state doesn't have a comprehensive plan? What are we directing our efforts to if we don't have this? The answer is we don't know. And that's why accountability is such a significant issue in this work. And I would argue that what we are fighting for is equity. It needs to be named. It needs to be called out. And we're not afraid to use words like anti-racist, acknowledging that this isn't a system that was built for us, that the lands that generated the funds with which you are withheld your due right is in fact indigenous lands, right? Those are things that we are prepared to say very clearly in these spaces, but it is very important to know that you guys are watching, reading, maybe even willing to write an opinion, a letter to the editor. The more the public can learn about the need for this plan, the more likely it is, I believe, that action will be taken in the way that we're hoping. And that's why, the freedom dreaming element, I invite you to join youth. What do we want to build? And there was a time when if you said you were fighting for the abolition of slavery, everyone would have said you were crazy. And I would argue slavery has just changed form, right? But the idea is that we can fight for something different. We can dream big, but we have to be prepared. We have to have accountability and measurable outcomes that we want. We have to have funding amounts aligned with that. So I'm not a, pie in the sky kind of dreamer. I am actually, but I understand that we have to be practical. And so we're asking that of you in the time that we are in between now and the legislative session. We brought a bill to the Roundhouse a year ago, HB 39, that was altogether $25 million worth of investment in 6 institutions to support the faculty of color doing the good work with appropriations attached. And there was an hour's worth of public testimony. And I've been in other meetings where I stood up personally and said, I support this, but no lawmaker talked to me at the end of a meeting like they did on that one, because they knew that I wasn't the only voice, that I wasn't the only one attached to this win. They will be moved when you show up. And this is an invitation for you all to get more connected with me, with Transform Education New Mexico. We have a website. I invite you to be, just on the lookout for more information. Dr. Moore and I are an email or a phone call away. I'm happy to talk to you and give you my card, but I think that's what it's going to take. It's going to have to come from us, from the people. So, are there any other questions or comments?
We're actually out of time, but thank you both.
Thank you.
Do we have you on retainer for the afternoon? All right, so it is time for our breakout sessions. We do hope you will stick around. Thank you both. Thank you, Dr. Moore, Dr. Wolf, for bringing this to us today. I hope as we go into our afternoon sessions that this helps inform as you listen and participate in those sessions. So we'll give everybody about 5 minutes to transition, and but thank you all, and give them all a round of applause. And we'll see you back here in about an hour.
Date for the legislature session. When is that date?
Oh, the legislature is going to begin, I think, around the middle of January. I don't have the
Like the
calendar.
19th or it's right. It's usually the Tuesday after MLK Day. Okay. After MLK.
Yep. To the middle of March. And the best thing to do is to go to Transform's website
Okay. On
and
the website.
subscribe.
Okay.
And then you'll be on our listserv.
Okay.
And I can guarantee
Definitely.
you that
Yeah.
you will hear from us over the course of the session with updates.
Yeah.
So,
Because I work with for the CDC for a tribal ambassador for them on that for the Learn the Early Act sign. So this would definitely.
awesome. Yes. Follow us on Instagram, all the
And I
things.
did in,
It's about collective action.
list on your list.
I just signed up on your website while I was sitting there. I'm Katie Appier. I'm the executive director for Jobs for America's
Anything that we
Graduates
can
in
do like
Mexico.
at a national level,
And,
you know, we're always looking
I've been
for,
working with the Department of Workforce Solutions, and they're looking at
you know,
putting us
success
on
things,
their
people, states that are doing.
executive
So yeah,
budget to start putting us
yeah,
to
sure, yeah,
schools.
that's, it's next week in Palm Springs, yeah.
I think they need to do more.
I'll get ready to head
So
out
I'd
there on
love to
Monday.
keep
Yeah, I
talking
have
to you.
I have a card.
I'm sure it will be.
Yeah,
Great
to meet you. If you have to.
Actually, I got cards yesterday, and they had the.
That's the first time I'm disorganized. But we can stay in touch because
Yes.
you might even be interested in joining us in our coalition.
I do want to join. I absolutely do.
Yeah, so I hate you so high and above anybody.
Make big efforts, right?
Let me come down. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful.
I'll be at the G to G.
Oh, yes, I'll be there as well.
So I think the biggest problem is what we're talking about is the accountability. Also, instead of raising the bar for our kids, they lowered it, and it's going lower. You know, so at what point do we say, that's enough's enough, lowering the bar as well? So they're not getting, or even if they graduate, they're not even ready for college.
Despite all of the efforts to increase student outcomes and get, better data on student standardized tests, that's not the answer. It's a systems design issue. So I would love to talk to Mr. Morris, and I'm just an email away. Did I give you a card?
Yeah.
Okay.
I got
I have yours, and I don't know if I gave you mine. But thank you, and I'll see you over at Knoxville.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hi. What's your name?
Give you my card.
Richard.
I'm getting ready to retire this year.
Longfellow. I love Longfellow.
Been there 15 years,
Wow.
and we have an incredible school. We have an
Yes.
incredible school. However, I'm getting ready to retire this year, and I don't know if I'm going to be one of those people that can retire. I've tried it already once, and I wasn't able to. I came back because I'm just too much energy in me. I am a veteran administrator. I have lots of background knowledge and information, not only with public schools, but I worked for 5 years for the BIA, and I was principal at San Felipe Elementary and Middle School for 5 years. Did an incredible job there. I loved it. We started CNAC. I don't have any idea if it's still in play. It was a coalition of Native American students. All the Native Southern and Northern schools in New Mexico were part of that. I don't know if it's still running or not, but we joined and we started a coalition to make sure that our voices were powerful and heard. We did a great job. I came back to APS for many years, but I'm getting ready to retire. And I've talked with our director. I've got unbelievable ideas as to how I think that we could make this lawsuit work in our schools, just based upon my background knowledge. To give you a little bit of that, I've been 43 years as a principal in APS, 53 years in the state of New Mexico as a principal. So I have background, I have a lot of it. I've been a Title I director in my past experience. I have a lot, and I would like to share ideas with somebody who is at a place that they could actually say, this might be something that might work.
Yeah, I'd love
Okay,
it.
so you have my card.
Yes.
I would love to come to a meeting or something that you might have. Just contact me and let's see if we can do it.
Absolutely. Thank you for your service.
Okay?
Yeah.
I love my job, I love my work,
I love the
obviously.
classroom too. Yes. Absolutely.
I saw you there, but I saw you talking to.
the only reason for registration was for food. So that was it. So if you are around and you want to come, I have your email. I'll send you the agenda so you're able to look at it. Okay. Yeah, you're more than welcome. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, right? Yeah. Yeah, and usually that's the challenge. It's like what one of our teachers is trying to do. He does a lot of the youth leadership, and they did the performance at the beginning of the summit. So what he wants to do is bring together all of the Native Student Union clubs come together and really just whether it's supporting one another, whether it's just hearing about what one other club's doing, and really hearing about this leadership piece as well. Because we have, gosh, we've done high schools here, and I want to say about every high school has a good percentage of Native students there. Yeah. So. Yeah. And that's been a goal for him right now. So I want to say I think he got some clubs to buy into it, but I think there's more that once this first one happens, they can come together again. So when he talks about student voice, I think that would be a really good opportunity just to hear from them. Because usually the students that are participating in these clubs want to hear more. So like the young lady who's doing the presentation in 103, Kaylee, she heads up the Skoden Club, Mahi. Yeah. So she's from El Dorado, so they have their club there, and I believe she'll be one of the ones participating.
What I think could help your colleague is if I do presentations to their because when I did that in Espanola, having taught we got young people and then we went through the events and then they asked me if these were going to go to the seat because they needed to.
Yeah.
By then, young people were pretty comfortable telling me what they wanted. And they said, this can't stop here.
There is another group. So we also work with for America's Graduates, JAG. So we have two JAG specialists that work through our program that specifically only are working with the Native students, Cibola and Del Norte. Okay, okay. And yeah, and he's a little bit out there, but he knows how to put an event together. He also does the powwow that we'll be having here on the 16th, I believe. So that's the kind of
What I'm asking for, I can do it in best, and I'm happy to go say I'm walking to schools and say, did you even know there was a lawsuit? And they say no, and I say, that they want, and they say no. And I'm like, you know what?
have more of this participation, we get some really good numbers of voice shared leadership.
And what I'm trying to do is see if there's people that can come in to invite them to be part of leadership development training for advisory council for our coalition. And so statewide youth advisory council. So I'm trying to build resumes, I'm trying to build confidence, all the things that native students almost never get invited to.
The JAC program at Sigala would be a good, yeah, would be, they had a event to host, or like their officials, their student officials, so she really engages them, she really has them participate in their events. She's won a national javelin for the work that she's been doing there with the students. So I think there's this, yeah, like, we don't know that if we don't meet, right? So like if Bernalillo or Rio Rancho or anyone else, right? Yeah, if this species might live there, then here's what a good program is. Just like they were saying, they want to challenge our students. Okay.
Yeah, well, I'm ready.
Okay.
I need a group and we'll work on it.
Okay. So you wanted me to email you,
So that I have your email
okay?
and then the agenda
That's right.
for tomorrow. And then if you could maybe share an email with a colleague that wants to do the.
Okay.
And if you don't mind telling me if someone gets an email from me.
Right.
A little bit of context, but then I can keep you in communication with them.
And for me to register for the, what was the,
On our website.
what was the website? We do that now before I forget.
Oh, exactly. I know you know the reality of things.
So I won't forget it too, because I'll start talking to somebody and be like,
I'm so built like that.
I don't know.
Well, thank you for
Yeah,
your time.
thank you
Your name
again.
is Thor?
Yes.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah. No.
The reason I didn't know, thank you, that I didn't know about this was because I left when you started this. So I just missed you guys as far as your advances. Yes, well, I have a lot, I have a lot to ask you.
Perfect.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah,
Good luck with the rest of your day and tomorrow.
Oh, well, we'll see more of each other for sure.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye. basically say from the 11th to the 15th.
Right, it's just after that negative economics.
Right, that'll be that first week.
Because I think we're really preoccupied with that.
Okay, all right.
But I don't think you have to pay for the food for that, so Lydia should be okay if you have to cater.
All right.
I've met him. He was actually where I met the superintendent. Leslie was Mexico Tribal English Consortium. They asked a panel. It's Francis Casal. Maybe it was another one, but he was the other one.
you go up there, I think it would be the best.
Hello, hello. Thanks for a good day.
I know, just like you get in out of the.
I like it. I really do. Like, I didn't think I was gonna like it, but I like it a lot. Yeah.
You're like glowing.
Huh? Oh, I'm just happy. I brace myself for the work, so it's been pretty good.
That's good.
When you're perfectly working, you don't get the work. It's a win. So it's pretty good.
Only which way to go is up.
Yeah.
I'm gonna start thinking that way.
Always have roast and beef after though. So, but no, it's been really good. Yeah. How are you guys doing this year? Good. I'll be here tomorrow too.
But it's been frustrating because getting staff.
That's the hardest part. I have a better
Now it keeps threatening to.
Yeah, who's that now?
And we're not sure.
I can guess who that is. And I don't know.
That's exactly what, I know, it's just like, you just told me. That's what happened. The person, you told her that? I was like, say it in a mean way. I was just like, you just told me.
So ambiguous, and I still try to keep them engaged. In fact, when I went on to my
And Anthony's new, but you've been at it for a while. And so, I know that you tell a story about that you feel responsible for having your daughter there in the first place. So,
That's a nice way of putting it. It's my experience. And I don't know if it's me, but I have a pretty darn good idea. You know, I told this last.
Like, at the end of the day,
That's the going up. I told this.
we're gradually improving the quality of the pool, but the problem is we keep growing it at the same time. So we've got another, we've got a third Martinez in the container. Yeah. We've got some in the rings. There's one that we've got coming up that I want you to help me next experience to be a positive one. So that I'll give it to you.
it was so cute. Like, because he was like eager and like, and he said he was so. So then, I had Kevin, and he was like, like 3 languages going on, and I was like, great, like these kids are engaged. Like, they're like, oh, I got this, and then she's like, how do you get to this thing? And she's like, please love it. And he like,
So we move up. He's over at Thailand in the morning and on some of that. And, we've got we have a soft spot in our hearts, so we'll both be thinking about Zinni, it's just I had 2 positions. We still have one open. I dropped the one because the state. A lot of people. We're probably going to be hosting several refugee analysis programs that are got their funding.
Fundraiser or something.
So we might have actually a lot of qualified motivated teachers coming our way here soon because the state promoted them.
We had like 3 start the process.
And Zinni, we just got 0 sites.
got to meet Mr. World. It was so crazy because I told you, like, we have such a good, like, we still have, like, a pretty good connection. And then one day I was like, try the chess class, I want to see it. And my kids were in there. And then he was like, how do you know these kids? Also, they're Trisco kids. It was so cute. Those kids are destined to be my kids. Even obviously high, they were there.
So he's working on this makes us students as well too, but he's really trying to organize Native student clubs to unify at some point, come together. And I think that's going to be really helpful in Trisco as well too. So that will be, yeah.
No, do you guys know, well, you know Tasha. We wanted to keep her very small. She was doing really good up with her club before she was a student teacher last year.
Okay.
Or teacher at the intern, but she's a real thing, so another good connection.
You know, we could also, yeah, that's what I was just thinking about. So we have coordinators now. So we have 3 coordinators in specific areas of the district. One is specifically for Rio Grande, but I think the work that she's doing might touch into Trisco. But she also does Pulse, marketing, and Las Ferias. So all of those pieces where she's doing cultural awareness and sensitivity pieces as well through indigenous foods. So I know Trisco has a culinary.
October 9th.
Trisco has a culinary. Yes. Strong. Yeah, that's what I was just what I'm wondering about. I heard Highland has a pretty strong.
Thailand has a very strong one. Okay. They actually cook for principals last month.
And they won several awards.
And they went some. Wow.
Ask them if they would. Provide food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They'll probably be cheaper too. Yeah, they did a taco bar for principals during the principal meeting in September. Ooh, now we're talking.
I wonder, because we have our exemption registration, and they did not have taco every time. And we would always get moms, and they'd come and like fry them outside.
Those were delicious. I remember those.
Who's sponsoring?
That's what I'm saying, I don't have a cup sponsor anymore, because Lily was doing it for a long time. So that's what I'm saying, that's the thing that I miss
Okay.
since she's
So,
only at my school till around 10:30. So I don't have a cup sponsor.
I wonder if they could share the sponsor.
Who are you sharing it with?
With,
Okay.
so, and she's strict, so I know she's not really ready to do the cup anymore. So that's what I'm saying, that's what I'm missing now, is somebody outside of the company to just kind of support all of those cool, like I'm happy to do it, but it's always
When did they meet?
so they were meeting, I think Wednesdays at lunch.
Wednesdays at lunch.
So most of the stuff is at lunch, because we're so far out there, it's really hard asking us to stay out too long.
Are you back over there?
No events.
Yeah, and they had a powwow last year.
Yeah.
So they, I don't want to lose all that.
Yeah, let us talk to them. Come out.
And I've met him before.
Yeah. So if you're aware of who he is. So,
So yeah.
and we see where he's at.
And even if I get somebody else to sponsor on campus, at least get them.
Yeah, we're regathering in here for some final words before we head out for the day. The last words. Okay. Okay, we're gonna get started here so we can finish up and send you all home.
It's a real short one.
All right, we have one microphone. Where did the other two go? Oh, here.
Got it?
So the next and pretty much the last thing we're going to do is we're going to have a discussion and share out by our tribal leaders who have stuck it out with us for the whole day, and Superintendent Blakey and her leadership, which would be Dr. Gonzalez and Ms. Jett, our Chief Academic Officer. And if there's any questions for the board, we also have our board vice president here. Okay? One board member. Well, we have some representation still here. President Natsin, if you can join us here. We're doing last share out of thoughts from. This is part of our process is to help us as we work on our systemic framework, that we are addressing the needs that you prioritize. And so the ask is reflecting on the day and the experiences and the things we've talked about, and the opportunity here to speak with our superintendent and our deputy superintendent. What are some things that you would have us keep in mind as we work together on and prioritizing the needs for our Native American students? Okay? And
I wasn't prepared for this, but sometimes we are forced to be creative when you're put to task, right? So I do want to thank the superintendent and the board of the Albuquerque Public School District. I think you guys are on the right track, and I love the framework that you guys are talking about, a continuous cycle. And I really encourage you guys to follow that, because I think one of the things that was brought up is that the term consultation. And I would encourage that it might cost you guys a lot of money, but again, that's what we're here for. You probably need to visit a lot of our pueblos directly, because consultations means having a face-to-face dialogue with the tribal leaders of the tribe and with the executive decision makers. So in this case, our public school district, I would like to have board members there, as well as superintendent, as well as your top division levels. You get to hear a lot of what the councils are talking about. They'll be more comfortable when you're in their chambers. The same way if I go to the Albuquerque Public School District boardroom, I will feel a little bit intimidated because you guys are sitting up there. But I think that's what we want to get to. And then you're going to get a lot of the real nitty-gritty that you need to hear. And a lot of times, a lot of our tribal leaders, again, like I mentioned, citizen legislatures, where you have different levels of ability. But when you meet them as a core group, you will see a lot of patterns coming out. Number one, what they're really feeling in their hearts, what they want to get accomplished. For me, being a former governor and then also being a tribal administrator, I see the need to actually interact with a lot of your departments, because we have a lot of students here. And again, the question is, why is a lot of Zuni parents sending their kids to the Albuquerque Public School District? I want to know that. And basically means, and again, no different. We have a lot of students going to the Raymond High School. What's wrong with our school district locally? And so the framework you guys have been sharing with us is actually very helpful for me, so we can work with the tribal council, say this is what we need to get done. So I want to really recommend you guys, really congratulate you guys on that one, the framework. And again, the terminology, systemic framework. A lot of times framework means what's the vision for the tribal council. So sometimes we can hear the same thing, and so when we're at the same level, we can sort of let them know this is what we're talking about. So on that note, you have about 300 Zuni tribal members working the schools here. And a couple of them are my grandsons. So I have a vested interest in that. But at the same time, I also see a lot of good progress is going on. The other side of that is sometimes I think the boards really forget that you have charter schools. NACA is one of those, the tribal schools. You have a lot of parents here that really work with that. And I think at that point in time, you guys probably have to visit the board, rather the board has to visit those charters and work with their boards, but at the same time, really ask the key questions. Are the administrators truly capable? If not, we really think that the Albuquerque School District as a whole needs to provide those services. It's not that we're saying that there's a deficit, but I think we need to make sure that all the charter schools themselves, whether they're folks Native American or Hispanic or the different versions of the preparatory schools, I think those need to be there. So I advocate both on those levels. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you're welcome to say things as well. So, so he gets the last word.
They have me down as the very, very last.
Oh, okay. Well, I wasn't prepared too. I have a few things that I wanted to address. I guess addressing our achievement gaps. I don't recall APS acknowledging their disparities in educational outcomes for our students and discussing strategies. So that's kind of one of the questions. I have a few, so do you want me to stop and you guys can answer them, or?
Yes.
Okay.
I won't remember them. So I'll start with this and then turn it over to Dr. Gonzalez and Ms. Jett for more specifics. But I think the achievement gaps have been overlooked in the past, where we have just kind of we're a little bit afraid to really dig into the data and be hit with the realization of the achievement gaps that we see within our students. So as a district, we are trying to be more data-driven in the fact that we're actually not in fear to look at the data, but that we have a plan to address when we see these achievement gaps. So the first way that we're really addressing it is through our goals of the district. And so our goals are actually specifically measuring our Native American students, which forces us to pull out those data separately and apart to see how are our Native American students doing. And that's a very different conversation than, all of our students are at 20% proficiency. Well, in the new way that we're doing things, we are looking at, okay, so tell me where your Native American students are. And if they say they're at 5% proficient, then it's a conversation that we are more open to having now, and how we address the needs that we can see clearly in the data that we're not addressing in our students. And for the specific strategies that we're using, particularly in the gaps that we see in Native American students, I will have Dr. Gonzalez answer. But I also want to point out that the important part about the data is that if you haven't seen it on our district website, under SAPR, so it's our SAPR, Strategic Assessment, it's something with a P in research, but it's SAPR. We have a public dashboard where we are publicly open about being able to review the achievement gaps. So on that dashboard, you can specifically look at Native American students, and it will tell you exactly how they're doing overall in the district by grade and by particular school. And so that really opens up the conversation so that we can't hide behind the data anymore, and that we can confront it and put in strategies to address the gaps that we're seeing.
Thank you, Dr. Blakey. Lieutenant Governor, just a couple of thoughts to add on to the superintendent's thoughts in regards to Native American student outcomes. One would be in a large system like Albuquerque, is oftentimes it's difficult to keep common expectation and common language common. But these goals have really called us to action to keep these data points and these throughout the system, elementary, middle, and high school, regardless of where you are in the school district, we are monitoring over time the same data points. And in these goals, our Yazzie and Martinez students, including our Native American student population. Within the goals, we also have something called a guardrail, which is kind of the instructions or the boundaries that this Board of Education holds the superintendent and the administration to. And one of those guardrails is high-quality instructional materials. And one of the components of that is the accountability measure that these materials that we're using in our classrooms are culturally and linguistically relevant for our diverse student populations. And that we have language programs in our schools that support and facilitate the celebration of language and culture. That we have within our social studies classrooms in the teaching of world history, U.S. history, New Mexico history, a culturally and linguistically relevant component that meets the needs of our diverse student population, most especially our Native American student population. Part of that accountability that the district needs to feel is conversations like these and putting ourselves as the district in spaces to hear from our tribal partners. Going in the points well taken by the gentleman that we need to put ourselves as leaders in our pueblos, in our nations, in our tribes, to be able to hear in your area, in your term, what it is we need to do to respond to the diverse learning needs of the students within the Albuquerque Public Schools. So those are a few of the strategies that we work with, and I'll close by just sharing, generally speaking, every single school within the Albuquerque Public Schools has what's called a 90-day plan. And the 90-day plan is a set of goals that the school has to meet every semester, essentially. So it's not waiting an entire year to see if we're hitting the mark or not, but really using interim measures and interim periods of time to be able to see if we're achieving for our students and giving us the time within the context of a given school year to pivot and adjust if we're not. So some of the strategies that we're using to address and increase our student outcomes.
Okay, thank you. One of our suggestions is building a framework for training, providing cultural competency training for administrators and educators. Our students continue to face racial inequities, so professional development opportunities need to be made available for them to understand the cultures and learning styles of the Native students they work with. Every tribe is different, so understanding diversity of cultures and experiences, this will also help the educators in the classrooms overcome challenges with misconceptions and stereotypes of our Native people. So how often are you sitting down with our Native students to see what they're facing, you know, what kind of problems? That's kind of I guess, my next question.
Lieutenant Governor, one of the things that we have invested a lot of time and energy in under the leadership of Dr. Blakey, our superintendent, our new superintendent, is really the emphasis of a professional development and training for our principals. We understand that our principals are at the school level and set the tone and the expectation for the teachers and the school staff at every site within APS. And really, to your point, the culturally and linguistically diverse training, the sensitivity therein, to ensure that our principals are setting the tone and the expectation for teachers, for counselors, for support staff, social workers, to be able to work with all of our students in a way that meets the goals that they have for themselves as individuals within the classroom and outside of the classroom. The expectation that we offer opportunities like we saw this morning, where our students are able to express themselves and are able to highlight and demonstrate components of their culture, to be proud of who they are, the language in which they speak, the heritage in which they come from. That is really something that we as a district take very seriously in making sure that that is evident and realized in every one of our schools. And we believe that the through line and the accountability to achieving that is through the principal. So really designing professional development consistent professional development for every one of our principals so that they understand the conversation that we're having today. And we give them the tools and the skills that they need to be able to implement some of these strategies and expectations within their schools on an individual basis.
We also have, actually here tomorrow is the summit for our students. And so students are coming from all over the city to take part of an Indigenous Student Summit. And we'll be hearing a lot from them that will guide us in the work that we'll be doing moving forward. And so that gives us an opportunity to listen to them and what they need so we can make sure it's tied to the work of the principal. We also have, I'm going to brag on Kaylee, who is back here. She gave a breakout session today, but she also is representing her school and the district at the Council of Great City Schools in a couple of weeks, which is a nationwide summit of the largest districts in the country. And she is able to give her perspective on a larger scale of national superintendents. And I think that our landscape here is important, but her voice being able to guide some of the policy nationally, I think is really important as well. And so we're excited to have her on that panel representing New Mexico.
I did sit in on her her presentation, and it was moving. I think APS needs to look at what's being taught. Goes back in history what we're taught as far as I guess how natives were treated, and the curriculum is still in school now being taught, and some of the students, I guess, are feeling that the wrong, that it's still unjust. And, I hate to say it, but it's everywhere, discrimination and racism still out there. But something, eventually might need to be changed down the road. It's not going to happen right away, but something to be addressed in the future. I guess my next question or questions, policy advocacy in cultural relevant curriculum, recruitment and retention of Native American educators, funding for Native support services. Is there funding set aside for appropriate education material? And what is the ratio of Native educators and or administrators?
Phil might know that one better than I know with the Native American educators, we're doing a very poor job at that, especially with teachers and with principals. And so that definitely is a place where I've seen that we have to do a better job in recruiting teachers and making sure that even in our high schools, we also have a teacher cadet program, which starts students in high school thinking about education as a profession. And I think we have to do a better job of encouraging students and our Native students to go into the profession and see themselves as role models for the future. So the recruiting part of teachers is really important because we can't have Native principals without having Native teachers, because you have to be a teacher first to be able to be a principal. So you can see where the system is broken. So I do believe that we have to do a better job in it. And I think that we can't wait for students to just come up and say, oh, I want to be a teacher. But we have to really identify the students that we see that represent their community and can be educational leaders. And so that definitely is an area that we are not doing well in and need to address in how we're recruiting and staffing our schools. The question also was about the budget, right? Yeah. So our funding, we were just having, board member Tom Roito and I were just having a discussion about the funding. Do you want to add to it based on what we were?
Yeah, I kind of want to add on to, besides NMPED, Title VI, and JOM funding, is APS seeking other funding resources to sustain programs supporting our students.
Lieutenant Governor, that's a very good question and one that we're working on. Under the administration of Dr. Blakey, we've established a federal and state programs office. And this office has basically been charged to look at a couple of things. One is return on investment. In other words, is what we're spending our funds on working? Is it showing a return? The other one is program effectiveness, in terms of, are we just doing something because we've done it forever, but it may be not, there could be something else that we could be doing instead of. So really looking at that from a very intentional and strategic point of view. One of the things that the Board of Education has set forth for us to really consider is student outcomes don't change until adult behavior changes. And we need to be honest with ourselves. So this office has really looked at those components and really begun to make sets of recommendations on how we can do things differently. They have been doing this on a month-to-month basis with the idea that they are going to come before us with the new budget approval cycle with a set of recommendations that we will be able to implement for the upcoming school year. So that will mean that we are taking intentional steps with our federal, state funds, and our operational funds to maximize them, to braid funds, to establish, continue, and ensure that the programs that we are running are meeting the needs of the students that we are monitoring within our goals.
And I think the other part of that too is that we're at a point, because of the question you asked earlier about the achievement gaps, to look at things holistically. How are we using our operational budget to really support those breakdowns that we're seeing within the achievement gap? So in the past, I think we've relied a little bit too heavily on outside funds to fund things that we need to fund first here operationally, and then everything else should help take it to the next level. But we've departmentalized things so much that we're not leveraging our operational funds first to address the achievement gaps that we're seeing with our students and how we're going to be addressing it.
What has been very helpful for me, and being Diné and sitting on a school board, is also understanding not where tribes are, but also being this advocate for our kids with disabilities has really helped me to understand not only Indian education, but also the general fund and asking and looking at specific questions. APS is on this move, and because we have a new superintendent and we have goals and we're goal monitoring and doing all of those pieces, I come in at a unique place, and being the first Native American to ever sit on this board since it was established in 1891 says a lot. But it's also recognizing, and I'm glad I have an open door and a relationship with everybody here, where I start asking questions. Impact aid, how are we doing on this? Are we following this? Are we following that? Oh, okay, what? And so it's also educating the groups that I'm sitting in and the circles I'm sitting in, even on special education, to have this open door to be able to say, what's going on here? And then with Phil, having all his data and making sure that everything is sort of all flowing and working. But everybody also has to know their duties and responsibilities. So understanding how education works, not as a board member, but also having also visited every tribe in New Mexico and have worked with tribal leaders and with our Native parents, that is a plus as I sit on this board. And I'm able to understand, but also bring understanding to those who may not know. So the thing is that as we move and we start moving forward, there's a responsibility that we also have to know, what is education? Where are those funding streams? Special education, because often many times I've come before our government to government people and often ask, how are our kids with disabilities doing? Many people don't know. Many people don't know how that funding stream works. Many people don't know that there are laws and policies that these school districts should be following. But they can't follow it unless we're involved. So the first part here is also know our parts. What's our parts too, and what's our responsibilities? Sitting in this place isn't easy as a board member, but understanding the worlds that do exist, I hope in the near future as we're moving forward, you're gonna see change happen. But when that door opens, I'm also gonna say, are you guys ready to step through? Are we all ready? Are we ready to have the courage enough to stand and say, I have a solution, just not a problem? We gotta be ready too. And that was the challenge to me when I decided to run for this position. It took a lot. But it was the Creator who said, this is your mission, get through it and start moving. Be more involved with your community. So as that, I hope that not only with my space and recognizing, I'm hoping more people will start walking through those doors and supporting and doing everything needed on behalf of our children. This is a great beginning. This is a great start. We all got to do our part. And I'm here, like I said before, I'm willing to train, to help understand, maneuver these procedures, because I've been here a long time. But I'm also here to help improve this district. That is my goal right now. And that's why I'm here on behalf of you guys and behalf of this administration to do everything I can based on my own knowledge and how I can help. I just want you guys all to know that, but thank you for that. And I hope that as we move forward, everybody starts to understand funding streams, what's our due responsibility, what do we do with our Martinez-Yazzie students, what are the guidelines for ELL students, what are teachers doing, what are about our kids with disabilities, what is the budget and funding through Indian Ed, and how do we get that process flowing, what's our IPP rules, what are all these things? Those are some of the things we need to know. The thing is that our Indian education itself was used to destroy us. We got to decide no more. It's not going to do that. But we got to be partners now in making this happen. But thank you.
Okay. The Pueblo of Acoma wants ongoing communication and collaboration. APS needs to understand that this is not a one-time conversation at this Tribal Leader Summit, but that there needs to be a continuous dialogue with all tribal communities to ensure educational best practices are culturally sensitive and responsive. It shouldn't stop at the Indian Education Department, but with the school board, superintendent, and other pertinent staff. I would also acknowledge that the Indian Education Department, thanking them for taking staff to several of the tribe feast days, including Acoma, which is a start for building relationships with tribes, that we continue the effective communication, accountability, rely on educational leaders, which determines if students reach academic achievement. To ensure this happens, all stakeholders should be included in strategic planning, which significantly impacts student achievement and success. Establishing a shared vision, communicating the vision, creating a culture, and empowering others can prove a realistic future for our students. Understanding APS mission, vision, and goals as a community, a school culture grounded in collaboration and high expectations can clearly define a plan to help improve academic results. So our recommendations, develop best practices to engage our Native students to help improve school climate that can support our Native students by finding best approaches to improving outcomes for our students, such as addressing challenges like homelessness, substance abuse, chronic absenteeism and truancy, achievement gaps, SPED services, etc., that potentially leads to dropout, suicide, and excessive exclusionary discipline. So we want your help to make better for our natives, Native students, the Pueblos, tribes, and nations. And again, I would like to thank all of you for the invitation, for being here and letting us voice our opinions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. And I want to reiterate what you said and what we heard earlier of the importance of us visiting and listening, because I do believe that that's where the authentic work lies, is in the conversations that we have, the visits that we have. And so I really encourage everybody to reach out and invite us. It's similar to how when I talk to teachers or principals, I always tell them, like, let me go to your school, because I don't know from an office what resources you need. We only know when we actually visit and see what is happening. And so I just want to encourage you to reach out to us, and because the answers to these issues we have with our youth is not within the 4 people here at all. But I do believe that the answers are collectively in this room. And so we have to listen to each other and work together. Now, what we do have are the resources. And so in order to be able to provide the resources to our students, we really need to open up the door to listen to you on what it is that is needed, because I believe that the solutions are within the community here, but a lot of the resources are within what we have access to. And so we have to work together to be able to make sure that we're connecting the resources to the right solutions. And so please continue to reach out to us. And I appreciate what you said too, that our serving Native Americans does not belong to a department within the district. It belongs to all of us, and our Indiana department is fantastic and a great connector, but they don't do the work, and the responsibility doesn't lay on their shoulders to lift up our students. That's all of our work. And so I thank you for bringing that to the attention of the group as well.
I forgot to mention, the board is taking on under our community engagement, really looking at this tribal conversation, but not government to government, community to community. So we're hoping here in maybe the beginning of the year is we're going to work on that initiative as a board to have those conversations and to go out to these communities and start visiting and listening to what's going on, because it's these major decisions like you were talking about with the goal setting, making all of these priorities with your input. We're hoping that the board can then pull these conversations into community engagement to create not only the government to government, but it's initially another set of communications where we're a little more honest with parents, we're a little more honest with tribal leaders, but it's the board dialogue, and how do we also shift within the board to have those conversations. So we're hoping to do that on another plane, that the board is going to have that initiative to create those dialogues.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'll put this invitation a few months out. December 25th, 4 days, feast up at Pueblo of Acoma. So come on up, everyone.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Who wants to be last? I was out of the room when they said they were going to be last. So I thought it'd be last. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, I just want to thank you folks for today. Kaylee did a really good job. and I'm very proud of her. I did challenge her to challenge you guys moving forward, challenge her instructors, because that's what it's going to take for our, at least Native students, because it was mentioned in the room there that not a lot of our Native students are confident enough to stand up in front of someone and to highlight their needs or their requests. Kaylee's a really good example of that. And at the national level, go out there and challenge them and do what you need to do. Moving forward, you just mentioned, there's a couple questions. One was asked by Acoma, and it's regarding stats provided by APS. Is there any remedial help offered to these students? I'm pretty sure there is. The other question we have here is what type of cultural offerings happen for Pueblo students? Granted, there's a variety of different students here. For me, this room would be great for a huge potluck for all Native students. That way they can interact, get to know one another. That then may help the students bond together to say, all right, well, we want this. Then come to you guys and ask for whatever they want. We did touch on the language courses. There are two, it's highlighted on the website. Students with disabilities and what services are offered to both the students and the families. They need help, just like any other student needs help. Those were the questions that Laguna has had. The one that's sticking out in my mind now is the community engagement the board wants to have with the different tribes. So is that going to also be considered tribal consultation? Because the board represents an entity, which is APS. For me, I would still consider that government to government, because you're an entity to its own. Per laws in Santa Fe, you need tribal consultation. And what you're doing is you're going to be coming to us and asking for our input. That's consultation. I would consider that tribal consultation. And if that's the case, I would support that it's continuous, maybe on a monthly, every 2 months. So that way we stay engaged, because tribal governments are being pulled left and right. And some things may get dropped. This may get dropped. Healthcare may get dropped. Other things may get dropped by tribes because they're focusing on one thing. For me, I would love that engagement, not only from APS, but from also GCCS, Grant Cebolla County Schools. We have the opportunity there to go to meetings, and attended an IPAC meeting, and it turned me off, I'll be honest. It turned me off because the parents were fighting on who wanted to be the chairperson. And if our parents are fighting, then we're showing our students it's okay to argue about a position, when we should be teaching them to argue about a position regarding what Kaylee was talking about. Books in the classroom that need to be changed and highlighted in regards to history dealing with Native Americans. Those are the items that we should be trying to figure out, not arguing amongst ourselves on who wants to be the chairperson or who has the loudest voice to be the chairperson. It's a group effort. It's a group effort. Sitting here again, listening, for me, we want big things. We want a lot of things, but it comes with a price tag. The state is trying to figure out how to cover the price tag. We have funds coming in, touched on it earlier with Impact Aid. One of the thoughts I had sitting here is, can APS utilize Impact Aid dollars to help offset some of the costs that come with Yazzie Martinez? Can you use that? For instance, use the money to, I don't know, hire educators, Native educators, or have students create the books themselves. That way, the money's being used properly, the way it's supposed to be used, at least for the students, but it helps offset costs that the state's gonna have to engage in, because it's gonna cost a pretty penny because of what we want. It's gonna cost. The challenge is the economy. Everything's getting expensive, which means teachers' salaries are gonna get more expensive, which means we have to figure out where we're gonna fund that teacher's salary. Do we then cut 2 custodians from this school, 1 from over there to cover this student. So overall, it's trying to figure out how to cover our costs to provide what we want. And for me, I've always wanted to know what it's going to cost us to hire a teacher, to hire whatever we want to do within the community. It's always going to cost us something. We have to figure out how we're going to cover that cost. So if it means partnering with, and I'll pick on Sandia, they're not here, but they're probably one of the wealthiest pueblos within your school district. So how then do we tap those tribes and ask them to contribute? Because you mentioned it, Superintendent, it's a community, it's an overall effort. And if we're wanting this for our students, we should be able to try and help find funding mechanisms that help you achieve what we want. For me, it's about the dollar and making sure we can cover the cost in regards to what we want. But money don't grow on trees. And unfortunately, we're sending billions of dollars to Ukraine, which is probably a humanitarian effort, but we're forgetting who, even just the everyday American citizen here, which those dollars can help. So just moving forward, I wish you guys well, I wish you guys luck. Again, if we're gonna do the board to the communities, I would consider that tribal consultation or government to government, because you're seeking input from the tribes on how to better fix the system that we're having issues with. So if that's the case, I would support that moving forward, and it probably be on a monthly basis. And how do you interact with your IPAC committee and involving the tribes that way? You know, moving forward, it's a collaborative effort. It's a long and tedious effort. But again, I wish you guys well. I wish you guys luck, and maybe we take $5,000 from the budget and go bet it all on black at one of the casinos, and hopefully we hit something. But I wish you well. Prayers are always, again, offered for all of you, so that way it helps you gather your thoughts and trying to find a solution for everyone. So thank you, though.
Thank you.
You're the second to last one.
Again, I wanted to reiterate the invitation was really nice, and definitely we wanted to have the consultation that we keep on talking about. I think the biggest issue we have now in any school district is setting benchmarks for our children. You know, the benchmarks are no longer there. The legislation has pretty much taken them away and lowered the benchmark. So what kind of students are we putting into the college level, or even into the workforce? You know, they're not at that level to really understand some of the stuff. And again, attending some of the meetings, the lowest ratings for, 4% can't even meet the minimum for mathematics, science, 26% reading, writing. So, I think we definitely need to make the benchmarks higher for our kids. If we can't challenge them, I don't know where we go from here. Everybody faces challenges. And then we do have resources for those kids to lean on. We have the tutors, we have our education departments, and these folks are very committed to making sure our kids succeed. And if we do have that partnership and early notifications on absenteeism, also falling behind, having that communication to our education department so they can intercede so the kids don't fall way behind and fail. And that's the goal of pretty much our administration, making sure kids succeed, whether it's in APS, Bernalillo, Rio Rancho, or Santa Fe Indian. We do have that communication right now to where we're getting all the data so the kids are assessed and we address their needs, whether it be academically, socially, if there's any issues, in the home domestically, those needs are assessed and provided as well. So the sooner that you notify the tribal administration or the Department of Education for each tribe, they can intercede. And again, I appreciate the invitation. Of course, as tribal leaders, we always want the best for our children. And again, it's I've been to DC and whatnot, but the best thing I heard was from a senator from Oklahoma, Mark Wayne Mullen. He told the Native community is, if you're not sitting at the table, you're part of the menu. So we need to ensure tribal leadership are at the table, including parents, so we know what kind of education our kids are receiving, and then for the tribal leadership to identify any shortfalls. So we do have that collaborative effort in ensuring that our kids do succeed. Again, thank you for your time, and prayers and wishes to you as well. And the other thing is, I wanted to emphasize is, if you have never been to a feast day at any other Pueblos, please do come to any one of them. They're open. Ours is May 1st, so it's a year, almost 6 months away. So please do come and see what your children participate in. Again, it's educational for them too. That's time immemorial, dances that have occurred. So you get to see what the preparation takes place and come and enjoy the food.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
President Snitson, you get, well, that was, I guess, the third of the last. So I just want to remind everybody, we have a few other events coming up. We have an Urban Indigenous Summit tomorrow for those of you who are RSVP'd. We have a Native American Economic Summit that we're going to be co-hosting with the American Indian Chamber of Commerce, New Mexico. I think there might still be a few flyers in the back if you didn't get one. I'll do a follow-up to the calendar invite where I'll add that in so you have access to that as well. That'll be on November 5th here in the same space. With that, we will be working on doing follow-up meetings to address anything, whether it's consultation forms, then policies and procedure documents, I promised Dr. Blakey last time we went out that she would be riding in the back of our Indian Ed car and we would be heading out to your community. And so I hope you have a better car than ours, and maybe we'll go in yours. But I do want to thank all of our presenters and everything. But starting a tradition that was started by Governor Ortiz from San Felipe, we promise our last speaker to have truly the very last word, and President Nassine, that is you to have, and to close us out today. Thank you.
Thank you. As was stated, my name is Adrian Natsina, President of the Hickory Apache Nation. Thank you for the invite. I think like any of leaders sitting here at the table, scheduling is a real big area that we have to move things around for us to be at this meeting. Along with what was spoken about the senator from Oklahoma stating, if you're not at the table, pretty much you're not going to be listened to. In a couple of weeks, I'll be going down to Denton, Texas for a FEMA meeting. We've been attending this meeting for the last 2.5, almost 3 years. Now the issues that we've been bringing up for all the tribes in the state are being addressed at Congress just because we're sitting at the table. With the speaking points I'm talking about now is that the scheduling needs to really be looked at. Look at the AID website. It has a calendar in there showing when each tribe, each nation, each pueblo are having their events. If it's possible, maybe you can work around it. Because, like I stated during my talk earlier, was that on the first week of every month is our council week. We have to deal with all kind of different issues, items that need to be addressed with an action item, so we have to be present. And just looking at my calendar, this month, it's full. We're a gaming tribe also, so next week I'll be in Vegas for the G2 meetings. The week after that, we'll be at Buffalo for the government education summit. So being at the table, it's, as one of the leaders, I think it's very much needed, but the scheduling needs to kind of be looked into from where it can kind of fit everybody's availability. And for us at the Hickory Nation, the executive side, myself, the vice president, nation secretary, the treasurer, and then on the other side, there's 8 legislative council members. And out of the group, we're all elected officials. So we have a vast, very different background in different areas. Some have master's degrees. Some, like myself, just has a bachelor's. But even with that, it's not a requirement to run for these different type of offices. So my area, like I mentioned before, I served on the school board. I was a councilman a 4-year term. I ran again, councilman for 2 years, which is half of the term I ran for president. Now I'm the newly elected president for the Hickory Nation. But with the background I have, even my degree in civil engineering, the focus I really have is in education. So that's why I attend these types of meetings. It's an area that, like has been mentioned, we do want our children to succeed, to do better than how we done. It goes back even to our grandparents. And speaking about education, when I look at my grandmother from in the early 60s, when we used to visit different tribes, different pueblos, she'd get out of the vehicle and she started up a conversation. Anywhere we went, either be Tawas, Santa Clara, San Domingo, Ignacio, down in Shiprock. Anywhere we went, she would start speaking their language. She never went to school one day at all. But when I look at it, she's more educated than myself, from all the knowledge that she knew from how she was raised. So all those values are what we're asking for. Even some of the stories that are told, some of our stories are only told in the wintertime. But all those stories that are spoken about are teaching tools, teaching you how to be a better person. It guides you through life. It sets you a path for you. So those parts of it or what we're speaking to is what's needed. The core values of how each tribe teaches their young ones how to be good young adults so they can be growing up to someone that is be proud of as one of our people. There was a couple years back when they were doing the virtual teaching. I was one of the teachers at the time, and it was tough. How do you keep their attention? How do you know they're actually there? That was a real tough time for every one of us. But the teaching side of all these, there was a math placement test that had to be taken. So I took it. Mind you, I have a degree in engineering. I barely passed it with a C. I was like, what's going on? Why is it so tough? What are they teaching them? And this last one, I was helping my grandson, and he's in middle school. The style of math they're teaching, it really doesn't make sense to me. They're breaking the tens, and then the ones, and then they add it all up at the end. It's like, why are you making it so confusing? It's just puzzling. As an average adult that went through the system and finished school and everything else, trying to help your child nowadays is real puzzling. It's tough. So those things need to be looked at. It's like a little bit of reworking how things are being taught. I'm not sure who came up with that idea of doing that type of math that way. It don't make sense to me. But on the other side is that when I was working with some of my students when I was teaching, I think it was Algebra 2, when we're doing a quiz, some of them, they freeze up. That piece of paper, the pencil in their hand, it for whatever reason, it just stuns them, it locks them. It's like, but when you sit down with them, ask them a question verbally, he'll explain it to you. There's ways to get to an answer. There's different ways of teaching. There's different results can be achieved by working and figuring out how each one learns, how each one is grasping the areas that are being taught. So all those different sides kind of have to be looked at instead of just using one way of doing it and say, okay, this is how we're going to assist it. If you can't do it, pencil and paper, you failed. As an educator, these things should be kind of thought about, looked into. The control of the classroom, the cold calling. In some ways, they look at you and like, how come you're always picking on me? But that's a system that is being taught to the teachers of how to control the classroom. Sometimes it works, sometimes it don't. You have to figure out as a teacher which type of teaching is relevant to each class, each setting. There's all these different ways that we can move things along. There's times when, as you speak with leaders, what I don't like seeing or not wanting to see is their hand out this way. I want it turned to the side this way, saying thank you guys for helping us and working with us. That's it. Thank you guys. He asked me to say the closing prayer. Kutsa pajike on kichichli da konunsia. Sha ai, shati ai, shai ai, na kos, nikostan, achina hata shin shin shin. Juna ai shitle na ai ilkhana tashi ego na hata shin ma he tansi an kutsa. Takoti ji lana segle na ilchin mika escuela llena ta lingo a. Yo da ikhaiko na zago yo da dil khaiko da ko na to na ha u lis sego a kutsa na ilchin mika kwai lana ta segle ya. Mitses na ta logo a, mitjet na ta logo a, tu ya ma ta til nigo a, sama si au, ma i tsetao, di ata injo me chitin chiko a gutsa, a shi digo na sni go, bika chisen zigo, ta ko di ta anal so, yo ta hida a, ika chiketis li ta ko mun si a gutsa, i het na, ta ina, mangani ata ni, amen.
That's it. Thank you.